Good morning, everyone. My name is Amanda Lurie. I'm a first-year MBA student here at Sloan, and I'm happy to present our sports and negotiation panel, and presented by Ropes and Gray. On our panel today, we have Daryl Morey, GM of the Houston Rockets, Bob Myers, GM of the Golden State Warriors, Arn Tellem, Vice Chairman of the Wasserman Media Group, Dan Adams, attorney at Ropes and Gray, Scott Rosner, professor at Wharton School of Business, and moderating our panel will be Deepak Malhotra from the Harvard Business School. Our panel will last about 45 minutes, and we'll have 15 minutes of questions at the end. If you'd like to submit a question, head over to the app and submit it there. And with that, I'll hand it over to Deepak.
Thank you, Amanda. Good morning. How are we doing? Excellent. Well, I think we have a pretty good set of panelists for you to hear from, and I think we all agreed that what we'd like to get out of this panel is not only some insights, but also hopefully a little bit of entertainment for you. So we're going to try to keep it live, and if we're failing at that, then we're going to depend on you during the Q&A session to really hit them with the best questions you can come up with. I'm just going to make a brief introduction about what this panel is about, at least how we're thinking about it. It's about deal making in sports, and we're going to be looking at deal making in sports essentially from three different lenses. One being how the negotiators themselves impact deal making. What are the things that negotiators are doing that are effective or ineffective that lead to good or bad deals? Then we're going to take the data analytics lens and think about how things have changed with the enhanced use of data analytics in all aspects of sports, in particular negotiations. And then we're going to step back a little bit further and take a look at just the system in which these negotiations are embedded. And I'm going to ask these panelists to think about ways in which we might improve the ways in which negotiations even take place to see if we can reach better outcomes for the parties that are involved. So we're going to be talking about negotiations, data analytics, and the entire system in which these negotiations take place. Before we launch into the questions, I just want each of these folks to maybe introduce themselves with a little bit more information about not just who they are, but the kinds of negotiations that they run into. What is their role in the organizations where they reside? So we can start over there with Daryl, and we'll come down.
I'm Daryl. We do negotiations. I'm the general manager, so our negotiations are primarily around free agency and trades, somewhat in the draft. And I'm here mostly to talk about the James Harden deal because I find that goes really well for me, and not about all my bad deals. So.
Well, that's good. I'm GM of the Warriors, Bob Myers. Do a lot of the same things Daryl does. I guess if it's about what deal was good, I guess Curry's extension was a good one for us.
Yeah.
But my interesting, unique anecdote is the guy to my left gave me my beginning in the business, I don't know, about 20 years ago as an intern with Arn Tellem. So he's largely responsible for why I'm sitting here today as the GM of the Warriors.
You can sit on my lap. I guess I'm in the middle because I think I'm the only player representative here on the panel, and we are the underdog. Come on. But I like being an advocate for the underdog.
It's already posturing.
Yeah. You're the largest agent in basketball. Yeah. How are you the underdog?
Anyway, I negotiate everything in my life. I think we all do. So it starts with my wife, my children, where I lose all the time, and I take it out on the guys like this, where I get a few victories. But I've been doing it for too long, and happy to be here.
I'm Dan Adams, attorney at Ropes and Gray. I do no players, but I do represent leagues, teams, individuals in their capacity as head coaches, athletic administrators, broadcasters. So in that context, I probably have a little bit different perspective than these folks, but still, again, sort of negotiation is the same principles, whether it's negotiating with your wife and kids, as it is with broadcasters and players and representing teams or players.
Scott Rosner. I'm a professor at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. I teach courses in negotiation, though not nearly as well as my esteemed colleague and moderator. And I also teach courses in sports business management, so I kind of cross both worlds. And negotiate in some different contexts, do a lot of work with professional teams and leagues, not necessarily all on the negotiation front. In fact, most not. But in teaching this and things we'll get into, we negotiate everything in life. From where you live to the job that you take, and what if you can somehow swing Odell Beckham Jr. in a fantasy trade, right? That kind of stuff. So happy to be here and share some thoughts.
Great, fantastic. And my name is Deepak Malhotra. I'm at the Harvard Business School, where I teach negotiations, and that's basically what defines most of my career. Thinking about, writing about, consulting, training, advising, all on negotiation, deals, disputes, etc. Mostly on the business side, and also some work where governments find themselves negotiating with armed groups or terrorist groups, etc. So, some of the same skills that you guys have been talking about come into play. So we're going to launch right into it. And I'm going to throw the first question off to Bob. And Bob has one of the unique characteristics being he's been both on the agent side and also on the GM side, so he's seen a lot of negotiations. I want to find out from you what you think are some of the things that people do in negotiations that are effective, and what are the kinds of things that people do that are not so effective, based on your experience?
What's effective? I think there's a lot of things that are effective, and I think one of the things that allows you to even answer that question is experience. I was lucky enough to sit next to Arn, and one thing about being an agent, which you don't get to do as much as a GM, is agents probably negotiate more deals. I mean, by sitting with Arn and working as an agent, we do 10, 15 deals a summer for basketball, maybe more, and as a GM, you might do 2 or 3. So the more you do, the more you glean from it. Some of the effective things, I'd say, Deepak, were outlining clearly what the parameters are, what authority you have to say what you're saying, what you're trying to accomplish, what you hope the other guy's trying to accomplish, and then also respecting the other side's position. Treating an agent is a negative connotation around the word agent sometimes. Treating them with respect, trying to understand they're trying to get their client paid the most money. You're trying to obviously get the best deals at GM. When Daryl, who negotiates a lot through text messaging, when he sends me a ridiculous text.
Very effective.
Very effective. When he sends an outrageous proposal via text, treating him with respect and saying, Daryl, that's not exactly something we would entertain.
It's called anchoring. It's called anchoring, Bob.
Right. So, there's a method to it, I suppose. But it's responding very calmly and coolly and not reacting. We had a good conversation one time when we were, it was during the draft, we were throwing out a ton of different deals, and I called Daryl and I said, Daryl, I have to ask you this, because sometimes you're asked to ask about certain deals, and it's how you preface things. It's how you set up the negotiation, and you get to know each other, you get to like each other, you get to know the agents. What's ineffective, I would say, some of the emotional reactions. It gets very emotional in our jobs with agents, because a lot of it's public. You're being tried and convicted sometimes in the public eye with why didn't you do this deal, why didn't you do that deal. So not drawing lines in the sand and saying things like, look, if you don't do this deal, I'll never put another player with you again as an agent. Or a team saying to another team, I'll never work with you again. We're never going to negotiate. So avoiding ultimatums, things like that, and just treating each other with respect.
That's great.
I would just say on the emotion side, one thing that can come up, and you'd know this as an agent, is just the pressures the agent's under with whoever is influencing them on whether they take a deal or not. And understanding that, I think, helps a lot.
Yeah. Dan, you're coming at it from a different perspective. You want to think about, help us think about what makes an effective negotiator in these spaces?
Sure. Sometimes I feel like in those negotiations there's winner or loser, or it's just binary, and there's maybe not a whole lot to work with, but in mine it's probably a little bit more creative. I try to think about it, the difference between the interests of the parties and the positions of the parties. They might come in and say, here's the figure, here's the figure I got, and I might have coaches that I represent, and they're obviously going to be different figures, but what really those are the positions they've taken. And what I found is very effective. Try to understand not only the other side and the interests that they have, but frankly your client, to truly understand the interest that they're thinking about. The one example I had when we started to think about this was a coach in a conference, men's basketball. He had been there for some time at the school. he wanted to be one of the highest paid. And so we had a figure, he had a figure in mind, his buddies had given him the figures that he needed. Not great data, and we came around to have some more important data. But the school had a figure in mind because they didn't want him to be the highest paid. And so really those were the interests. He wanted to be one of the highest paid, and they wanted to make sure he wasn't the highest paid. So there was room there to build it, so where we sort of bridged the gap. In fact, we built a mechanic that said he would always be in the top 4 most highly compensated individual in the conference. And it worked out well because they got what they wanted. He always was sort of 3 or 4, but never really the top. And so we're able to satisfy the school's requirement of, listen, we don't want to be the top payer, but we're willing to make you one of the top payers.
Great.
I was going to say, I don't know if you agree, about working on coaches' contracts because you can get more creative.
They don't count against the salary cap.
Yeah, well, and you know, a lot of our deals are uniform player contract. With coaches, you can put performance on the floor. You can have other contingencies that allow you to bridge gaps.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, we are constricted much more than you think, at least in the NBA, as far as what you can do on a player contract, maximum minimums, what's allowable in the CBA. But coaches, it's wide open. And we don't get to negotiate wide open contracts, probably beyond
Very
coaching.
often, no.
You know.
Yeah.
You have to fire a coach every year just to keep in practice.
Try not to do that.
We've kept every coach 4 years, at least.
So Arn, you want to add to the conversation? I mean, you have probably, I mean, the reason you're sitting in the middle is because you're the underdog, but you also have the distinction.
I don't buy the underdog.
You also have the distinction of being the person probably with the most amount of experience here in negotiations. What have you learned about effective and ineffective?
Well, I think from an agent's perspective, and probably even anyone's perspective, would be that you begin before the negotiation begins and try to envision where you want to go and where you want to end up. So the idea is to have what do you see and what's your goal as the outcome, or have a strong idea of it. So you have a mental vision, and then the key is to find a path to that outcome. So then it's research, preparation, trying to understand what is going to be the give and take back and forth in the process that's going to, as you play out the game, and to anticipate. And I agree with Dan, a lot of it is problem solving. The key to a successful negotiation, there's sort of 3 ways of looking at it. There's a hard negotiator who it's win or lose, and it's the only outcome is just sort of waiting and sticking to your guns, and there's really no negotiation. And the question is whether you can ultimately last longer than the other side. That sometimes works if you have the right leverage or the right client, or if you're the team and you know you're in a dominant position. But the problem with that is it doesn't lead to it sometimes takes a long time, it's inefficient, and it also leads to a result where one side is bitter. And if you're in this business and we're relationships like mine and Bob's, or
Not Daryl and you.
Not Daryl and me, but we're so much of in our business is the relationship and trust is a huge element for an owner, especially, to know that he can count on your word, and that you can make a deal, and that you're trying to work to a deal. So then it's really trying to get the other side to look at it together and try to, like you're working on solving a problem. Mm-hmm. And if you can enlist the other side in saying, well, how do we come up with criteria that we're going to look at this and try to come up with the right result? So you try to take the personal side, like Bob mentioned, the personal side out of it. You try to take threats out of it. You try to take, and you try to make it more on objective criteria, comparable players, relevant salaries, what statistics are appropriate to judge this player by. The more you can do that and enlist the other side to look at it together, it leads to I think a more principled result for both sides. Like where Dan said, everyone can sort of create options and solutions to issues as they come up in the negotiation, where both sides come out feeling good about it. That's the goal. It doesn't always work that way, but that is the goal. And I think as I've gotten older, that's what I've tried more and more to do. But a lot of it is, like Bob said, when you have experience and you develop relationships, so I have a very good relationship with Jerry Reinsdorf over the years. So we've signed a lot of players with the White Sox, we've signed a lot of players with the Bulls. And that personal relationship allows me to sit with Jerry and figure it out from that perspective. So that's a unique relationship. And it's, I think it's benefited him, and it's benefited me, and we've done a lot of deals, Pau Gasol being the most recent, but we've had a lot of Derrick Rose. It's and Albert Bell, Frank Thomas with the White Sox, to name a few, but it's been a relationship that's been productive. We've been able to get deals that have satisfied our clients and ultimately satisfied both of his teams. So that's, I think, a huge part of it.
So, Scott, you're not only out there getting your hands dirty in the negotiations, you're also teaching negotiations. Yeah. So from your point of view, what are people missing, and what are they doing well?
Yeah, I mean, so when we think about the traits of effective negotiators, Arn kind of ran through, and Daryl and Dan and Bob kind of ran through this laundry list of things in their that we think about in their conversations. So preparation, right? So making sure that you know heading into it exactly what the relevant metrics are, if there are any metrics, know what their positions might be and what their interests are, as Dan pointed out. And we think about the most important one. I believe it is the most important trait of effective negotiators is being prepared, and how much of the battle that really is. Yeah. And then once you're involved, understanding leverage, and people I think misunderstand leverage a lot. The students misunderstand it when we teach it. Leverage is understanding when you have it is important, obviously, but when you don't have it. Right, it's like the old Kenny Rogers song, The Gambler, right? You got to know when to hold them, know when to fold them, know when to walk away, know when to run, right? And understanding that is a huge piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. One other point on that is the most effective negotiator, and for any client that you have, you want to be able to present them with every option. The key is not to miss an option. So it's like playing chess. You see the board, you see all the moves, you see it all playing out, but you want to make sure you do not miss an option. And the one example, most recently, where it was so relevant was when I negotiated Derrick Rose's shoe deal with Adidas. The money was one aspect of it, but there was a lot of other issues that dealt with sales, royalties, what happens in the event of injury. How do you protect, it's not its typical player guarantee contract when a shoe deal. How do you protect a player in the event of an injury on a 15-year potentially shoe deal? And what rights does Adidas need? What rights do we need? So we came up with, this clause took probably 4 to 5 months to ultimately agree on when we were renegotiating his deal. And I took incredible time and tested the patience of Adidas because we had basically agreed on everything, but this one clause came down to really was a 4-month negotiation. And I remember when they came in and sat down, but I had various, what happens in every potential scenario if Derrick Rose would ever get hurt. This was before any of his injuries. And we ultimately agreed on certain clauses that would allow them to get out, but they would have to hit certain criteria and objective standards for them and they can't get out of the contract in effect. That was the net result. But the second thing was they also had one of the right to reduce compensation if he wasn't playing, which makes sense. But we had a catch-all that no matter what, his compensation would be tied to their sales. And when they agreed to that, and there was a percentage of the sales that he would, no matter what happens with injury and not being able to play, and this was the final point, that we agreed to a clause that gave him that sort of catch-all protection, that there was a criteria to measure his impact even if he was hurt. And that clause has prevented them from basically reducing compensation over the last few years, where in every other shoe deal, I can tell you, most players are vulnerable to that. Yeah. So it's not just about negotiating money, but a lot of people do this. A lot of people get by because it never comes up. But here is one instance where it came up, and unfortunately it's come up a couple times, but there was a series of protections that that gave him not 100% protection, but close to 100% protection. And he was able to, get the economic benefit of the deal and continues to do that.
Bob, you want to jump in?
And I think what's interesting is, as far as kind of Arn being my mentor and watching he did McGrady's shoe deal, and it had a similar language which you battle over, but you realize, and maybe it's having a legal background, when he talks about 4 or 5 months of a clause, it may be 2 words in there that you just won't agree on, right? Or is it a mutual doctor or a doctor that's agreed upon that decides if you can play or not play? But a lot of agents and a lot of people would say, hey, I got a 15-year, I don't know what number it was, I imagine it's pretty big for Derek, shoot it, and I'm done. And they forget about, like Arn said, the difference between having a clause in the contract like that can be $100 million by having that clause in there or not in there. And so I think what I learned from Arn is the details of a negotiation. Mm-hmm. You think everybody, what the media reports is, a 10-year deal for $100 million. And that's good, but what protects you as a player from getting that? What protects you from the team side of having to pay that? That stuff never gets reported, but it may be the most important part of the negotiation. So you learn, like Arn said, what are all the options? How do you protect yourself? And paying attention to those minor details that you think may not come up, but always do in some cases.
And there were trade-offs that we made to get that. So everyone ended up feeling good about the deal at the end, but it was a way, for us, it was trying to envision what are the most important things in this contract for our client's perspective, what are the things we can give to make the other side feel good and feel that they're getting a real benefit out of this deal, but what are the key things as we look through maybe 20 issues where we got to focus on and come up and keep having the discussion and coming up with as many ideas as we can to give him the protection. So there's probably 15 standards by which we end up in that contract by which we measure his impact on this company. Yeah. So it's not just simply it's the money and they have a right to terminate or they right to reduce. There's a lot of other things that have gone into this deal.
Well, you have me convinced. I'm looking for a shoe deal myself, and I know I'm going to for that. Before we leave this topic of negotiation effectiveness and ineffectiveness and move to the data analytics, it does occur to me that it's sort of easy for us to sit here and sort of talk about what makes somebody good at negotiation and what makes somebody not so good, and almost wear the mantle of we kind of know how it really works. It sort of begs the question: what are the things that we're not doing well? So I don't want to dwell on this for too long, but in a sentence, in a word or two, can we just go down and talk about the 1 or 2 things that you think you don't do as well as you should, even based on your own criteria for what makes a good negotiator? And we'll start with Daryl because I know you have a long list, but just pick one. The first thing that comes to mind, just go with it.
I mean, I do feel like we're still not very good at it. And I was trying to think why. I think it's the time pressure. We often deals will come up with very short time periods. But I would say specifically the things that are tough are when it is a no, when it is a non-deal, which is like 99.9996 sigma percent, it feels like, of the time. It's not to just stop there, right? And often you have to with the time pressure, but if it's, well, why isn't it working? What is it? And the folks that you like to work with, like Bob and many others, who are here at the conference, they'll be open. They'll say, okay, this doesn't work because X, Y, Z, and then that allows you to come back later and be creative.
So just to be clear, the answer, what I'm not good at is blank.
Yeah, doing that.
Nothing. Yeah, doing that.
I think that thing.
Persistence in those moments when it looks like things are falling apart.
Persistence in those moments instead of like, I'm just going to move on to the next idea.
Yeah, very good.
Whereas if it's sort of, I would call it maybe the Wile E. Coyote persistence. He always gave up after the 5th thing of his contraption to catch the Roadrunner when the 6th one might have worked. So I feel like if we stayed with these deals, especially with teams where they will give you feedback rather than, okay, I'll just move on to the next team. I do feel like I don't do that as well as I should.
Bob, the one thing I don't do as well as I'd like is... you had time to think about it.
No, I got it. There's
really
a lot
good.
of things, but one, I mean, it's hard to just say one. Daryl's was good. It's, I probably say no too quickly
You can't
sometimes.
steal my answer.
No, but I have another one too.
Okay.
But that one was good. I think sometimes it's, and I I think you have to operate more from courage than from fear in deals sometimes. And from our perspective, I know Daryl's, you're under a microscope, and sometimes you're reluctant to do a deal for factors that shouldn't be the most important things. Disrupting your team or fearing how it might be, I guess, viewed or handled. I mean, we didn't do a big deal and got hammered. I mean, we got crushed. But we had
working out okay.
Yeah, it worked out okay. But I have a big interest in like how, I mean, the media component of what we do is big. I mean, because you can't ignore it. It affects how you're viewed in your market. It affects how you're viewed with ticket sales and your business side.
How your owner feels.
How your owner feels. So you have to operate from courage. Luckily, I have a group of people around me. And that's why I think what we do in the front office, being collaborative, gives you courage to say, yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
Or let's not do that. And so just operating more courageously would be good.
Great. Aaron?
I think for me, the challenge as you get older is not so much external, it's internal, working with other people in your group. When you feel confident in your ability and know that you can do it a certain way and you're used to doing it a certain way, is working in a collaborative approach with other people, other partners, other associates, and who are trying to grow and who want their moment of doing something. For me, and as you watch them and you want to give them the rope to do it, and you sit back and the question is how much rope, when should you step in, when should you say something? Everyone has their own style. You got to get comfortable with giving people, the people you care about, opportunity, just like you did with Bob. With him, I never cringed, but that's really difficult. Yeah. It's really difficult because it's a lot of times you say, all right, just let me do it, or I can do it, or maybe, am I getting old? Is his approach better? But it's dealing with, it's really more of a much, it was much easier and simpler when I was alone building a business than now when I'm managing, many agents. And so that for me is continues to be the greatest challenge.
Yeah.
I think using the wrong metrics to measure success. I was thinking about Arn's point on Derrick Rose. If you got $120 million for 10 years as opposed to $100 million, but in the $120 million you didn't have any of those protections, I would have now looked back at that deal. That was a great deal representing Derrick Rose. If you took the 10-year $100 million with all those protections, and that sometimes is hard for a client to even understand. Yeah. So you're trying to explain it to the client and describe, no, frankly, I think this is a better deal. So we might have the metrics for success is the bottom line, $120 million. Well, geez, you only got me $100 million. Yeah, I thought you'd get me $120 million. Well, I got you $100 million. Well, when you blow out your knee 3 times, you're going to be protected now.
And that's in the NFL a lot. Because you see these big deals and you don't know what's guaranteed. Yeah. In our deals, you report it's guaranteed. But in the NFL, I don't even know. You say this kid,
Philly.
Yeah. Philly, I don't know what
Not
Philly
guaranteed.
does. Philly doesn't do guaranteed deals.
Where's Sam? Where's Sam?
All right, Scott, the one thing I don't do well.
I care way too much about what other people think of me. I like to be liked.
You know what? We like you, so you're...
Yeah, thanks, man. That's kind of nice. No, I think that matters. I mean, so it doesn't mean I'm not going to negotiate firmly or anything like that, but I do care too much about what the other side thinks. And, listen, not to go too Freudian, but I'm an only child. I grew up, if I wasn't nice to other people, I didn't have anybody to play with, right? So, I'm like, kind of like outside shooting hoops by myself, pretending I'm Julius Erving, right? I needed to play against somebody.
Bring out the couch, folks.
Yeah, there you go. So it's had an impact. No, sir. I mean, I'm sure that's where it comes from, right? So you think about the bargaining styles and everything else, and all the metrics that you use in teaching that I use, and thinking about students figuring out what their style is. It's I'm on the cooperation, collaborative, very high in both, and which means to me it comes from the fact that I like to be, I'd like to be liked.
Great. Well, we're going to make a bit of a pivot here, and we're going to sort of turn to the data analytics side of this. I think we've mined this first area quite a bit, and I think for some good outcomes. As we think about the data that's now available, and the way in which it's being used, and especially the ways in which it's being used now to facilitate negotiations. What role is that playing? And I'm gonna ask Daryl to start us off here. How have you used data effectively in negotiations? Where could you do it more effectively? Where has it maybe hindered negotiations?
Yeah, it's a big part. I think it ties to what Bob said. I made a great point on needing to operate out of courage or fear. And I think the data gives you courage and can provide fear too, because it can raise questions. But I would say mostly it provides courage. So just to paint a concrete example of that, if we lost Yao Ming and Tracy McGrady, and we were desperate. And we were desperate for a high-end talent, because the reality is you can't win this business. You can't win in the NBA without, top X player in the league, top 10, top 20, worst case. We were desperate for that level of talent, and you can't get it. You either have to pick high in the draft. We weren't picking high in the draft, so we knew it had to come by trade or free agency. Generally by free agency, it's not going to come until you have someone else, because the free agents only want to join if they feel like they've got a chance to win. So we felt like the first step was going to be a trade, and so that desperation led to probably our worst deal. We had a lot of data that we felt like Terrence Williams was like a real high-end talent. We knew about some of the issues he had maybe that weren't about his on-the-court talent, and unfortunately that trade didn't work out. That was probably one of our worst deals. Shortly thereafter, however, we built up over a year or two a bunch of draft picks and things that we could trade, and the James Harden deal came along and as an opportunity, and we basically told the owner we should just give them everything. Like literally every possible thing that isn't bolted down at the Rockets should be traded. You should be, me, anything should be traded. And our owner asked the right question. He was a very smart guy, very successful in many business. He was like, so this is the guy, and he understands data. He's probably the reason a lot of the revolution. He is the reason a lot of the revolution happened. He gave me my shot. He said, well, where's the data? And there was a lot of data with both Harden. A lot of people thought, and even we, you never know till you get them, that maybe Harden without Durant and Westbrook, wouldn't be the player he's now shown. It's easy now. But we did analyze, simple things and more complex things, but simple things like how did he play when these people weren't on the floor? And it turned out he played unbelievably well. And that sort of, we felt like it was the right thing. We saw him, we liked him in the draft, but even simple data like that, okay, the one main criticism people are worried about, there's data that says that looks pretty good. That gives you that final thing to sort of dump everything over the line and say this is all in.
Yep, great. Arn, you want to jump in as well from a different perspective?
From my perspective, analytics and numbers really help a negotiator take the personal and ego part out of the negotiation. So the more you can rely, again, it goes back to criteria, the more you can rely on numbers or analysis in a presentation and get the other side to agree to look at it from that perspective, it helps. To me, it eliminates threats and bottom lines, and it gets you to focus on the crux of what the value is and trying to focus on the goal, which is coming up and making a deal.
So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit with a question that was actually asked by the audience. I'm going to interject it here because it's on the same topic. Does data analytics also go into trying to figure out whom you want to represent, or will represent anyone?
A little bit. In the beginning, when you're an agent, and you open up you hang up your shingle, your criteria for taking clients is much broader.
Anything.
Are they alive?
Anyone that comes, you're happy to take. As you get more successful, you tend to be more selective. In basketball, it's not too difficult to identify for purposes of the draft and what you think of a career, who the players are. In baseball, there's analytics, I think, come into play a little bit more from that perspective, because you're dealing with a wide pool and you're looking at more criteria where you may be able to project someone who may be doesn't have the numbers, but may do certain things very well that project out well. But in basketball, I think it's relatively easy to identify, for our purposes.
Don't tell our owners that.
Yeah, who could do this?
Easy for them to identify.
So it's more for negotiating purposes than what clients we're going to go out and seek.
Yeah. Any one of you can answer this question. I'm thinking about the use of data in two ways. And both of you, Daryl and Arn, have talked about the fact that having data can take the emotions out. It can kind of make things a little bit easier. It can grease the wheels. So in some sense, more data helps both sides of the negotiation. You can also imagine a world where one side having better data gives them an advantage. Where do you think it's playing out most strongly? Are you seeing that the way in which data is being used by individual teams or agents finding better and smarter ways to use data to get the advantage in the negotiation? Or is it, no, really where we're making a big shift here is so much more data, less argument about what the value of an asset is, more deals that should get done are getting done, and fewer deals that shouldn't get done are not getting done? Where's most of the
I think what's interesting is the data. I mean, I think we have similar access to data. We may employ some of the same companies that Daryl and I, the Rockets and the Warriors, utilize. But it's how we value the data that differentiates us. We have the same numbers. We can all be looking at the same page, but how does Daryl and his coaching staff and front office, how do those numbers resonate with them as opposed to how they resonate with us? Whereas an asset they may identify has much more value to them because of how they value the numbers. So I think the implementation of analytics, we're overwhelmed. I mean, I'm sure you could spend every day, 15 hours a day, looking at the analytics surrounding your team, surrounding other teams, surrounding the value of players, surrounding how you should go about trying to pursue certain players or keep players on your own team, sign players. It's finding a way to implement those and finding a way to put the right value on those that I think is the challenge. And so all of that needs to be done first before you decide to go out and negotiate on behalf of those numbers. So it's that, to me, the analytics are there. I think you have to acknowledge the value of them, but how do you implement the analytics in your organization? And Daryl knows sometimes your coach is receptive to certain areas of it, sometimes you're not. And your own staff will disagree on it, your own front office sometimes.
I would just say real quick, I don't think in the free agency realm of player-agent negotiation, the data is helping at all because neither side believes or trusts the other side. So we'll say this, they'll say that, and it really just comes down to market dynamics is what I've found.
Free agent, it's like putting your house on the market.
Yeah.
I think your house is worth $2 million, and you say, you know what, it's worth what it gets paid for.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what players are worth. It's worth what the market is.
Yeah.
I was going to say, and when it's athletic administrators, head coaches, we probably have less data. So I tried, frankly, to take advantage a bit of the information asymmetry. If I'm representing a school, I might have made Open Records Act requests to gather up some information that the other side may not have. If the head coach is represented by an individual that just hasn't done that preparation we've all talked about, that I try to use that information asymmetry to our advantage.
Yeah. Well, and I think also on the college coach front, and whether it's men's basketball or football, right, the two sports in which there's real revenue, when you get into the revenue generated, the marginal impact of additional wins or tournament appearances or advancement in certain rounds in tournament, or bowl game appearance, whatever the sport is and the relevant metric is on revenue, right? And so that's certainly, if you've got the right analytic framework, that could certainly be a tool in pursuit of additional dollars or even just leverage that you gain in the negotiation.
Mm-hmm. Being mindful of the time, I'm just going to pose the last question and get a few thoughts on it before we move to the audience. One of the things that a lot of you have mentioned, at least in passing, are just the constraints that are in the environment itself: media, time pressure, the market will decide, et cetera. And every negotiation table is situated in a broader environment. And some of those things you can't do much about. You may complain about it, but there's not much to be done about it. Those are the rules of the game. Are there things that you think could be changed to make negotiations and deal making more effective in some aspects of sports? Are there things that leagues or teams should be doing differently that would change the rules of the game in a sense? allowing for better deal making to take place. And again, I'll start with Daryl. And you and I have talked about this in the past a bit, and I'd be interested to have you share your thoughts.
Yeah, one frustration, I think, Bob, you'll appreciate this, came out of our conversation is, one thing that made the James Harden deal or any big deal hard is that, you have fear on both sides. We fear James Harden won't be good enough. They fear he'll be too good.
Right.
And you're trying to make a middle deal point on all these different probabilities. And, Deepak mentioned very simply, he's like, well, that's solved easy in every other industry. You just say, if they become this, then you send stuff later, and he has a fancy term for it.
Use contingency.
Okay, all right, contingency, all right. And so I actually...
We got fancier terms, but...
I actually brought it up with the commissioner, and he thought it was it. But there's some practical reasons why the league won't allow that, even though I think there might be a way to overcome them. But I think that could allow teams to not operate out of fear. Like if that Harden trade had like, if he becomes an all-star, you have to send yet another future first-round pick. Or if he fails, then we get back a pick. I think that would really grease a lot of deals. And you had a very public, large deal that maybe could have been greased. Who knows?
Yeah.
I'm glad probably good it wasn't. But
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I think I would add to it. It's funny when deals get reported in the media or they're discussed. This isn't fantasy basketball. This isn't we can trade X player for Y player. It's so much harder than that because the rules. You're constrained so much. Salary, matching salary, cap limitations, luxury tax limitations. So what I think there's two things. One thing I mentioned to you, but one thing would be, and Kirk Lacob and I've talked about it. Hockey does a salary retention. I'll trade you X player, but I'll maintain $8 million of his $15 million on my books.
Baseball does it.
Yeah, baseball does it. The NBA, more than any other league, I know, at least for us, is the most constricted as far as baseball. You move $20 million player for a $1 million player. Football, he's not working, I'll just cut him because his contract's not guaranteed. We operate in a totally different sphere. So that's one area. The second area is, and I think it goes to Arn's point, which I want people to understand. This is an analytical conference, which is great. There should be a relationship conference because so much of the business we do.
You could start that.
It's funny. Daryl and I were joking on the way in. I said, we were talking about who you know, right? And I said, you always do deals with Henke and Ainge and Chris Wallace and all these guys you worked with. That's a joke, but it's not a joke. I mean, he's more likely to do a deal with somebody he knows. And in the fraternity of the NBA, there's only a limited amount of people you interact with. There's 10, 12 agents that you're going to interact with. There's 29 other GMs for me. That's not a big group of people. So if you become familiar with one or you like one more than the other and it's a tie, you're going to go with that guy. So in our free agency period, Daryl knows that there's a moratorium. We cannot sign deals, but we can agree to them. So if Arn, because I know and trust him, if he says, we want to sign X player for a $5 million a year deal, and that's our mid-level. And Arn says, okay, yeah, let's do that. We don't have it written, and we can't sign anything for 2 weeks, roughly. I need to know that the next day, and I tell our owner, hey, we have this player that Arn represents for our mid-level. Our mid-level's gone. I can't have, nor can any organization, Arn call 2 days later and say, yeah, you know what? We got a 5-year deal now for $8 million, and thanks, see you later. I just lost the opportunity to sign all these other players. So the oral word, and this has happened. There's examples of people backing out, agents backing out, sometimes teams. That puts you in a precarious spot. And it can really hurt you if somebody goes back on their word. So that 10-day period, I mean, Arn can maybe add to it, but that's why the relationship's so important. You have to trust who you're talking to.
Scott, you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think the collective bargaining agreements in each league dictate a lot of this, right? And as you guys alluded to, the lack of creativity in the player contract in the NBA is something I think a lot of the agents, especially the really good ones, right, would like to change. The NBA is trending much more towards what other unions do in salary slotting. It's pretty much in lockstep, and you have a player who you think is going to be excellent. If you think about Jahlil Okafor, you can predict to a pretty high certainty what his earning is going to be on the court for his entire career, and that doesn't leave a whole lot of room for having on the floor for having a great agent step in and be able to come up with a creative deal. On the flip side of that, we have Major League Baseball, which of the big four allows for the most creativity, and the agent's role is really, you can really take advantage of it, and you think about, the good agents can really distinguish themselves from the others. So I think there's something to that, and that's purposeful, by the way, that the agent's not as involved. That's not an accident in the NBA. So I think that really inhibits a lot of the creative deal making. You can't do a Derrick Rose kind of shoe deal. You heard a phenomenal example of creativity in that deal, right? I mean, that's phenomenal, right? That's state-of-the-art deal making, but you can't do that for a playing contract in the NBA.
No, well, a couple of things. You're right. First, as far as what's the most efficient, productive negotiating process, short of free agency, is baseball arbitration. I don't think the other sports would want to have it. They prefer restricted free agency, so it is a collective bargaining issue. But in baseball arbitration, it leads, very few cases go, but it leads to a real analysis on the numbers and objective criteria, and it leads to an efficient result, and most cases settle. The ones that can't, there's a neutral, independent arbitrator to decide the result. In basketball, the one thing I would differ on is that right, a lot of deals for the clearly max players, James Harden or LeBron James, are obvious. So that isn't, but the art is, for the agent, is guiding him through the process of when to do the deal. Should he wait? Should he go to free agency? Should he get traded? Guiding him potentially through a trading process and hopefully working to help get that trade accomplished. And also making a decision if it's not an obvious player. I had one this year with an NBA team on a player who's going to be a restricted free agent this summer, on whether we should do a deal or not. And we went through the analytic discussion on numbers, but there was we didn't get a deal done, and the player was subsequently traded now. But it was clear in retrospect, looking at that negotiation, they were using criteria that we just couldn't agree on the criteria, what we were looking at. And two, at the end, they just did not see the player. There was just a gap in how they saw the player. And I think that led to the subsequent trade. The player ends up in a better spot now as far as being able to, well, he's now on a path to getting financial security. So it's guiding that player in that critical decision whether he should sign or not sign. Should he take and grab the security, or should he wait? And that takes some knowledge of what the economics will be if you wait. The key thing overriding all this from a player perspective I just want to add is, I did a study looking at the NBA before the season began, and on age. And before the season began, on all the opening day rosters, 3% of the NBA was 35 or older. Roughly 20% is 30 or older. So that doesn't even deal with all the players in the D League and all the players that try to make NBA teams. So that would even skew the numbers even more, would bring the numbers down even more. So roughly 80% of the NBA is under the age of 30. So what that means is players' careers are very short, as we all know. And two, the sense of urgency that we deal with every day representing a player, it's a life or death to them. Their careers are incredibly short. And that is a huge override when you talk about the pressure everyone feels in this. There is a lot riding on us helping them get the results they need now. They can't wait. They have to get the results now, because no one can predict with any. The NBA is probably the most uncertain, maybe football too, but you have to live in a world of uncertainty, unpredictability, and change all the time.
So I'm going to jump ahead here to the most highly voted question, which I can understand why it is so, and we're going to have to go with it. And after that, I'll exercise some discretion. And the question, as stated, is can we have Bob and Daryl negotiate for a minute? And I'm going to time it because we're running out of time. No. Specifically on whether Harden or Curry is the MVP.
Right? It's an opinion piece, really. Daryl would text anyway. He would text me. Harden is the MVP.
Pretty simple. take James Harden off our team, and you know, we're nowhere basically.
Well, this,
No offense.
This is gonna sound. No, you know what? This is gonna sound mean, but in the spirit of not having much time, we beat Daryl this year. We're 4-0.
We beat the champion 4 times last year. That did no good for us. So.
Right. Well,
but when we meet in the
Curry's
playoffs,
having a great year. Our record is at this moment better, and we beat him 4 times this year.
Yes.
That's my case.
Well, that.
When
we meet in the
I have to weigh in here.
Are you going to arbitrate?
Oh,
But I think Harden's really good.
Russell Westbrook is way better than both of those.
Okay.
Guys. Not even close.
And
Who would you pay to see? Russell Westbrook or any of these players?
who does he represent of those
If you
three,
look-
right?
if you look at the points, rebounds, assists, so what James is doing, really only like 5 people ever have done it. It's LeBron, it's Michael Jordan, it's, you know, it's no one else.
All right,
I think James is great. I think they're all deserving, even Westbrook.
You're gonna find some common ground.
Just give him 3 war, and LeBron's pretty good. Hey, that guy
Can't go wrong.
That guy's pretty good.
So we've touched on a number of elements of these other questions already, so I'm going to jump around a little bit. This is a slightly different way of thinking about it. And Aaron has already discussed this, but I want to get other people's views on this. What are some of the most creative, innovative, and useful clauses you have negotiated into contracts? And you really set us up with a great one talking about the Derrick Rose situation. Other innovative, useful clauses that you think really help define the situation?
I can think of one that is creative in terms of influencing behavior. I feel like some of the limitations they have with the CBA restricts them. I'm thinking about representing a mid-level school in college football where there's a provision, and again, I'm not going to speak to the policy or conflict of interest, that we allowed the coach to go out and cut a deal to play a major program for a guaranteed game compensation, and that the coach would get a portion of that for their own compensation, again, to sort of bankroll the whole budget of the athletic department of the smaller school compared to the larger school. And so basically in football, you can go out and get $1 million to go drive to Ohio State from your sort of campus with your team. Again, it might be a bloodbath. The kids, always seem to think they have a chance, and there's always upsets, so you never know. And you get, non-conference games. The conference games are built for you, but the 4 non-conference games, you could do that all 4. But now another piece of it is, do you want the coach decides, yeah, I'll get some extra compensation for that. But is that going to be, I'm starting off the season 0-4, and that might not bode well for me long term. But a way to sort of be able to get compensation, certainly none of that stuff is allowed by collective bargaining agreement. Again, and I'm not going to say whether that's the right thing or not.
Any another example?
You did it. Were you the first one that did the lottery guaranteed pick?
Yeah.
That was good.
So
you can tell them what that was.
Yeah. So it was part of the James Harden deal. I always bring that up whenever I can. Yeah.
It's a good deal. Okay? Everybody knows he did that deal. He's a good player.
and he's better than a few others.
Yeah. Great. Good job.
So when we traded with Toronto with Brian Colangelo at the time, they needed a point guard. We traded Kyle Lowry to Toronto, and we needed to guarantee. We felt like if we were going to retrade that pick, and we needed to guarantee it was going to be a high pick. Classically, all the deals in the league were protected, like, hey, I'll give you a pick, but if it's really good, I'm not going to give it to you. We did the opposite. We actually had to check with the league it was legal, and they confirmed it was. We only get it if it is good. It seems simple when you say it, but no one had done it. So
instead of lottery protected, lottery guarantee. Pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So you're going to almost.
Yeah, pretty close.
There's in 7 years
it
could be. Yeah,
it's one of the few things you've done.
And then the smart guys who actually came up with it all got jobs running other teams.
Philly,
other
organizations.
I don't want to go back in time too far, but I do recall, Bob, you talking a little bit about respect being a big component of how you interact with people, and I was just kind of noticing that seems to be slipping by.
Yeah, it's going away.
So we're gonna move on to something a little bit different here. I'm gonna read the question out as it is, and maybe try to
interpret it in a particular way. There are players where I'd imagine there's not much to negotiate. For example, Curry, Harden are max contract guys. What types of players are the ones where the negotiations are a bit trickier? So what's the profile of a player, I suppose, where the negotiations are the hardest?
Yeah, for sure. It's either the sub-mid-level. It's all, everything's driven by our government, which is the league office, and so it's the sub-mid-level guys, the guys who are over minimum, below $5 million a year, and it's the guys between 6 and 15 are the hardest ones because now it's a real negotiation. I mean, other times you're like, I only got the mid-level, so here you go. Or
you like that, right?
Yeah, I'm sure that's your favorite part.
I love that.
I mean, you must be driven crazy by the baseball.
Yeah, Arn's probably the best one to answer that. What the difficult? I mean, Daryl, I would say the same thing.
No, Daryl hit it. I think in the NBA, it's the hardest one. It's because I'm go to numbers. I think almost half of the contracts in the NBA are non-negotiated. So think about that. You're on rookie deals, which is a huge part, which is for 4 years, which is a huge percentage of the NBA. You're on minimum deals because of the way the cap works. A lot of teams fill their rosters with minimum players at the end. So now almost 1/3 of the league, or 25% of the league is on minimum contracts, over 100 players. There's players on max deals. There's players on mid-level deals. So there's a very small percentage of NBA players whose contracts are really negotiated. And that's the effect of basically a hard salary cap. And those players, where it's the most difficult for me, is the players that are valuable players that are starters and who are very good players, but not clearly in the top 20 or 25 players in the league, who are players 25 through 75, who are trying to find their way and get their value in a very restricted market where most teams are at the cap, and very few teams are under the cap, and have the room to pay them more than the mid-level. And that's and just like this player that I had this fall, who's going to wait and who's a very good player, and he'll end up doing fine, but it's those players where it becomes really challenging and really requires some thought and analysis of whether you can, who can pay it and who will pay it, and identifying those potential teams.
I would say it's also quickly just the players who are contributing in non-classical ways. The defenders might have more trouble getting paid than offensive players just because of history, although that's changing.
But that's where the analytics, they've done some of the Kirk Goldsberry's, some of that defensive metric stuff will help players like that get paid, where in the past maybe they didn't get rewarded enough.
It goes to Dan's earlier point about what you measure is what you try to optimize for, and if that's changing, that's great. I'm going to put this as the last question, and any of you are welcome to jump in on it if you have strong feelings about it. I think it's relevant because so many of you have touched on the human side of the negotiations. And no matter how much data you have, there's going to be that element that's going to be required. You're never going to have enough data to know for sure whether this is good. You're not allowed to do certain kinds of contingencies. There's so much time pressure. And so you do deals more with the people you trust. That was mentioned by a number of you. Dan also mentioned the idea of making sure you understand what they really, really want. The question here is, what happens when you don't do that? And maybe it's inadvertent, but how do you handle the aftermath of a bad or tough negotiation where a side feels like they may have lost? How do you manage that for the next negotiation? Now imagine, you've done it to the other side, that they're walking away, and maybe you're the one who's lost some of that social or political or relational capital. What happens then? I mean, have you experienced any of that, and what's the aftermath of that like? In any context.
I'd say one quick thing. I think it's very tough because of the media environment. Like, everyone else judges the deal, so a lot of the James Harden deal is good for us, obviously, but if you go back at that time, it was about maybe 60-40 in favor of what we did. But the reality was the pick we sent went the wrong, like it was supposed to be higher, it ended up 12. I think at the time we traded it was going to be 7 or 8. The players we sent, we sent a player who to this day I think will still be good. I don't think I can mention him, but maybe hasn't played as well. So a lot of the things that went out moved in one direction, and obviously James moved in another, and that's tough because we wouldn't write any of the articles that get written about it. I mean, but
well, you don't know, Deepak. You don't know. I mean, when you do the deal, I don't think Daryl knew. I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people thought it was a good deal.
Yeah.
By the way, he did the James Harden deal, if you didn't know that.
Hold on.
James Harden's on the Rockets.
He did the Steph Curry extension.
Right. Which was actually fine. But you don't know. You don't know. When you see these rapid reactions, this grade, it was an A, it's an F. I mean, the thing you do is if you're in it long enough, like if Arn and I do a deal, when the deal's done, 4 years from now, you say, you know what, you kind of got me on that one. Or you know what, he looks at me and says, I should have got more money on that. Yeah. But it's the length, it's the body of the deal. You can't judge the deal 5 minutes after. So how do you feel? Agents probably feel like I should have got more money, and teams probably feel like I shouldn't have paid that much money. But at the end of it, it's clear, but nobody cares about the end of it. No. They don't care about that part.
I'll say something from.
You got 20 seconds.
Probably not so much with teams doing with teams because it's hard to evaluate it at the moment and it takes time and it's a arm's length negotiation. But with a player, I can say there's been probably a handful of times where the player, where I've felt based on circumstances and the moment where there was a level of bitterness when the negotiation ended. And inevitably, that set us on a path where sometimes I felt more strongly than the player, but either way, that there was going to be a day of reckoning. And I never believe in making threats. That's one thing I would never do.
We talked about ineffective negotiating.
Ineffective negotiation is to make a threat. I never make a threat. The key is just do it. So when the time comes, I don't want to talk about it. When the time comes, those moments, I'm going to get mine, and I'm just going to do it. So I'm not going to say it. I'm just going to do it. So I really have but to make threats.
Does this involve physical harm?
So
I'm worried.
Don't screw them
and it
over,
may take
basically.
years. It may take years, but there will be another moment, and there was, and so the player
We have
either
the
left
Count
or.
of Monte Cristo.
right.
Is very okay. So you know what? We're gonna end it here, and I'm gonna leave with one thought and one question for us all to ponder. The thought is, in the beginning, I remember every one of these people started talking about how to negotiate with family and to negotiate with internally and externally, and it's all a negotiation, all the same stuff. And it just kind of sounds like a talking point, but I think the more you reflect on it, the more it becomes obvious that, and even in these financial deals, sports deals, fast-paced negotiations, the human side of this is very important. So when Bob is running the conference next year on relationships in sports, I think it's important to remember that negotiation fundamentally is about human interaction. Doesn't matter whether you're negotiating armed conflict or sports or business, the basic question always is, how do you engage with other human beings in a way that reaches better understandings and better agreements? Whether or not those are going to be written down in a contract is secondary. And I think it's kind of a nice thing to have come sort of full circle on that. The question, I guess, and maybe it's an unanswerable question, but we should all ponder it and discuss it throughout the rest of the conference, which is, who negotiated the James Harden deal?
That is a great question.
One of those unknowns.
It's hard to figure out.
We're going to wrap up, and thank you all to the panelists and to the audience for your questions.